Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Amara podcast.
I'm Lexi.
And I'm Miriam. And today we'll be discussing why we as a society are so obsessed with murders.
Stick around if you want to hear about that. And also, if you like this video, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell notification button.
Just a disclaimer, we are not experts, we are not members of the police or psychologists, and this is all our own opinion. So let's get started. First question. Why is the public so obsessed with murder?
Why is the public so obsessed with murder? Because if you think about it, like, how many murders happen a year? Like, less than 100 in the UK. So...
Really?
I would say less than 100 murders happen.
I feel like it would be a lot more, because it's always, like, in the news, oh yeah, 3 people stabbed, or, like, you know. So I feel like it's more.
I suppose it's what defines a murder, because, like... A lot of the time, I would define, like, a murder as something that was, like, premeditated. Like,
Exactly.
They purposely went out seeking to kill somebody. I would say a lot of things that end up in the news are just, like, fights. Not just, obviously, people died, but, like, fights that went wrong. Like, things that weren't meant to be murder. Like, when it comes to... I don't know. Like, what's the difference between being a murderer and a serial killer?
Well, serial killers usually have similar tendencies of, one, killing more than one person, but also there's something about them where they don't have any remorse, and usually they don't actually have a reason to kill. They do it because it brings them some sort of pleasure, whereas usually murderers, like mundane murderers, they have an intent if it's like a crime of passion, and that's also the difference between being charged with murder to the second degree, to the third, to the first, being charged with manslaughter, because they're all you killing someone, but it's about the intent. It's about whether it was, you know, accidental or, you know, and also, like, I feel like it's just fascinating.
I mean, it's whether you're a danger to society, I suppose, because if you killed someone in a crime of passion, yes, you have it. If you kill once, you have it in you to do it again, probably. And then a serial killer is somebody that actively goes out of their way to attempt. So they're more dangerous to society, I would say. They're also harder to catch, which is what scares me. Because when someone dies, like, the police instantly go, who's the closest person to them? Who are our list of suspects? Who was here? But if it's somebody that the victim just doesn't know and never has known, and they have some really vague connection, it must be so much harder to catch them.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe what makes people so obsessed with murder, is, like, the idea of why someone would want to... Because I suppose as humans we are quite agreeable. Like, we want connection. And I don't think we like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I've ever just been like, oh, really wish I could kill someone today.
I mean, apart from me, obviously.
Oh yeah, you know, day to day I'm just sort of like, what is the best thing I could do that would really hurt Miriam's feelings?
Just exist.
Honestly, you existing really hurts my feelings, Miriam. Why do you have to be better than me?
But usually with serial killers, it's the fact that they have no connection to the victim, which is so fascinating. And the murder is often, not all the time, premeditated to the T. They've planned things out. And also, highly fascinating is the fact that a lot of serial killers in the past have actually really, really high IQ levels. And in some instances, they actually want to get caught. Like, they leave little trails behind because they know they're so good at covering their tracks that if they don't, they won't get found out. And that's the whole Ed Kemper thing, where he was actually friends with the police who were investigating his murders, and he actually turned himself in because he was like, you know what, they're never going to find out it's me. And he was aware that what he was doing was wrong, but he didn't feel any remorse for what he was doing. And that's...
See, that's the thing that's terrifying, because does that then raise the question, is it good? Like, us doing this podcast, like, people doing true crime shows, like, people, it being in the news, is that almost a bad thing because it's giving them what they want? Like, it's almost like, if you talk about it, if you're really into true crime, like, all of those shows and stuff, because I know a lot of the time when I was researching the Golden State Killer, they said to some of the victims, I have 3 TVs in my apartment, like, I'm watching the news. Like, a lot of the time it's this really weird cat and mouse kind of game of, like, they want the chase, and you know what a lot of it is as well, is that a lot of the time the way that serial killers get caught is they get cocky. And so a lot of the time they will purposefully leave something behind because they want the thrill of it.
Yeah.
So is it not, like, feeding into what they want to give them these big, like, you know, like, you never hear of a serial killer that's just called, like, Bill. Like, Bill the killer. It's always, like...
Kill Bill.
God damn it, no!
It's Jim from the chip shop.
Yeah, it was Big Jim. Big Jim murdered.
Hello, Jackie.
Big Jim with his big knife. Big Jim with the big dog.
Wilson.
Well, goodbye, Jackie.
He just stabs her repeatedly.
Just like, hello, boys. Oh, yes, your mother is quite dead. Wilson. He thinks Wilson's the police. Yeah. But, like, that's the thing. They're called, like, the Golden State Killer, like, the Zodiac Killer. Like, if you just sort of
Such an
called them,
awesome name.
like, is it not giving them that ego that,
Yeah.
like, they have all of these news stories, they have all of these books about them, and
Yeah.
they're like, because I feel like a lot of the time they want recognition of, like, being intelligent, of, like, look at, like, I saw this play because I'm cultured, and it was called, like, The Rope or something, and it was about these 2 Oxford, it was fictional, I don't think it actually happened, these 2 Oxford graduates that decided to kill someone, and the whole play was them trying to get away with it, and the reason that they killed him is because they wanted to see if they were smart enough to get away with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, is it weird that somewhat I can relate to that?
Yeah. I feel like we're so fascinated because there's a tiny, tiny bit of every single one of us that is capable of murder. And it's sort of like a what if scenario. Like, what if this was me? What if I could get away with this?
Yes, because when you see it happen on TV shows, you're like, no, if he had just hit the body here, they never would have. And you're like, no. Wait,
I shouldn't think like this.
I shouldn't be, like, also I shouldn't be rooting for this guy.
Yeah.
Like, god damn it. Although I kind of also really root for the people who are trying to catch them. Because I'm like, oh, come on, because they work so hard to do it. Like, it takes the same amount of I think that is the thing. Is serial killers, statistically, are so much smarter than average. And then you need someone who is just as intelligent to be able to catch them.
Yeah.
And it's, like, almost the serial killers have the upper hand because they have, like, it's the idea knowledge is power. Like, they know what happened. They know what to hide.
Yeah.
Detectives don't know what to look for a lot of the time,
Yeah.
in my opinion. I don't know. Miriam, question. Do you think you could get away with murder?
Well, speaking as an intellectual,
Oh.
if I planned it out and everything went well,
Like, not well because you killed someone.
I was searching for a more intellectual word, but well, I feel like possibly, but also a lot of these serial killers were around when technology wasn't as developed and there was no such thing as DNA testing. So you have to bear that in mind. But I still think it's entirely possible that someone could get away with multiple murders in today's society if they were smart enough to plan it well and nothing got in the way.
I think that's the thing, is, like, your heart is the thing that gets in the way. Because I think if you killed someone, the reason why we don't kill people is because we value human life.
Yeah,
and
we
would
have a moral code.
Yeah, and we'd feel really guilty. Like, it's not just that it's wrong, it's almost the fact of, like, you in yourself don't put yourself above somebody else. Because I feel like a massive thing that also comes into serial killers is the ego. Like, a lot of it is they genuinely think that they are superior to the people that they are killing. Whereas if you are, like, a regular person, if you did murder someone, you turn yourself in because you don't believe that you deserve life more.
Yeah.
So while, like, logically, I definitely think that you could get away with it, I don't think you'd want to. I think that's also the thing, is, like, serial killers have an active want to get away with what they've done.
Yeah, which sort of links into the fact that a lot of the time serial killers are psychopaths. They feel no remorse for what they've done. and they understand that what they've done is wrong, but they don't have the emotional intelligence, I guess you could say, to feel that it's wrong, which is why they continue doing what they do.
Is that then what the murder is for, though? Is to sort of have that... Because I suppose if you're so numb to emotion and you're so, like, numb to feeling empathy, is the murder then the thing that gives you... Is adrenaline, like the adrenaline from killing somebody and trying to run away from the cops, is that what... Are they sort of trying to gain what they lack from murder?
I guess you could say that, but also it's like a independent sort of thing. Like it varies. So, for example, with the Ed Kemper thing, he said that his childhood was really shit. He had an abusive mother, and he ended up killing his mother and then performing oral sex with her severed head.
Oh.
And that is like, for a regular person, that's absolutely disgusting. But obviously for him, he's probably so filled with rage at his mother. And obviously because she was emotionally abusive, he doesn't feel guilty because it's revenge.
Yeah, in a way, it's sort of that idea of the ego, is that his mother put herself above him.
Yeah.
And so he has then mimicked that behaviour and learnt to put himself and his life above other people's, I suppose.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the time, it's very difficult. I think one of the most difficult things and why it makes it so hard to catch a murderer is because we don't think like that. And a lot of the time, you have to think like a murderer to be able to catch one. But we're sitting here trying to sort of think and explain why murderers would do this kind of thing, when really we could be way off. Like, we have no idea if this is the truth. And I think it takes a certain lack of empathy to be able to catch a murderer, because a lot of the time you have people who are hyper empathetic who will get so distracted by how awful and how sad and how gruesome it is that it actually takes somebody like-minded to a serial killer to be able to catch one. So then what's the difference? Like, is it not probable that people who are catching serial killers are the most likely people to be serial killers?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I mean, not in obviously not in all cases, but in some cases, the people who were on the FBI or, in the police force were actually assistants to murders. Or they were the ones who were committing the murders because they know how the police think, and therefore they can actually take the investigation into a whole different direction that doesn't stray towards them. They're smart enough to do that, so why not?
They're playing both sides.
Yeah.
They know the system. So I think, honestly, when it comes to solving crime, it really comes down to information and, like, how to gather it. Because I think a lot of the time, so in the case of the Golden State Killer, I was reading the book I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and it's a fantastic book, I would highly recommend it. They were saying at one point that from the way he crawled from one window to another, they instantly thought military training. The way he was so smart with technology, the way he could, do certain things, and the way he could get around, and his operating system almost was on that same stringent timetable of do this, get out at this time. And you almost have to have a lot of patience. Like, you have to plan so much in advance. And it seems so baffling to the average person, because why plan so much in advance to do such a horrible thing?
Yeah.
Would you not think at some point to be like, I shouldn't do this? But then I suppose once you get into the headset of, I am going to do it, there is nothing, would you say that murderers are overachievers?
Yeah.
I would definitely say that there is some, because you hear it all the time, in like true crime podcasts, in books, on their deathbeds, they always confess to a bunch of murders, some of which they didn't even commit, and they always say, oh, this one was me, this one was me. They almost want to take credit for it in a weird way.
Yeah.
And that links back to what you said about them leaving clues for the cops. Like, why do you think they do that?
Well, for example, the Zodiac Killer, he sent loads and loads of letters to the police in an attempt to almost... Well, he wanted recognition. He told the police that if they didn't print the code
The cipher.
Yeah, in the newspaper that he was going to kill again. So he wanted recognition. It was an ego thing, and yeah.
I think that is the question of everyone wants to prove that they're intelligent. Everyone wants to prove good traits about themselves. But they value the trait of intelligence so highly that they would want people to think that they were intelligent over thinking that they're just a decent human being. Like, people think serial killers are evil. Why don't they care?
Yeah. And also, you know, it poses the question, are serial killers, or, you know, killers in general, a product of their society? Like, did society create killers? That's just interesting, isn't it? Because what if there wasn't this whole, like, competitive side to everything we do? Like, I feel like a lot of the time everybody views things as a competition when really it doesn't have to be like that. And it just sort of brings out the worst in people, I guess.
Yeah, I think there was a sociological idea of, like, the idea of relative poverty and the idea of absolute poverty. And the difference is that if you were in absolute poverty, then you were in terrible living conditions and you couldn't function. But a lot of the time in absolute poverty countries, people don't mind. Whereas if you are richer than those people in your own country, you could be unhappy in a first world country, because in relative poverty, it's the fact that everybody around you is doing better. So if you live in a society where you feel like you're at the bottom, you have that feeling of being a failure. Whereas if you are doing less well, but around you, everybody else is also doing terribly, you feel better about it. It's like those things where, like, when you get a bad grade on a test and everyone gets a bad grade because nobody studied, you feel better about it, weirdly. So maybe it's a case of, because you were mentioning abuse being a big factor of, like, providing a serial killer, maybe it's the idea that they feel like they're at the bottom of society, and so they almost want a way to prove how much better they are.
Yeah.
So maybe it's, because I think many people could grow up in the conditions that a serial killer has, but still not become one. I think it's linked. It's almost like a recipe. You have to have an inflated ego. You have to have, like, well, you don't have to have, but it's more probable that you have a bad and abusive childhood.
Correct.
Inflated ego, high IQ.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost this sort of formula.
Algorithm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And going back to the thing of being a product of society, you know, I was watching the Ted Bundy tapes on Netflix, and it was that whole thing of he grew up watching hardcore porn, and, you know, a lot of the victims were also raped, or, you know, he raped them after he killed them. It goes back to, like, society does create these people. Like, not all the time can you necessarily stop it, but there are often a lot of issues that we cannot help having.
It's definitely the idea of fantasy.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, because when you have those psychological conditions that stem, so when you have a psychological condition that stems from an abusive household, you are probably more likely to indulge in fantasy because it's an escape. But if you have that psychological condition, your brain doesn't understand where to draw the line. And so I think a lot of the time, serial killers, they are wildly delusional.
Yeah.
A lot of them think that they're doing God's work. You know, a lot of the time they think that they're doing something sort of, you know, in order to appease some, like, there's some form of brainwashing almost. Yeah. Like, there's some form of, they are doing this because they are living in this fantasy world and they think the rest of us are wrong.
Yeah.
So it's, I suppose we are in a society that would breed serial killers because we're in a society that breeds the idea of fantasy. You know, everyone likes to say, oh, if you work hard enough, then you can achieve your dreams. But realistically, if your parents can't afford to send you to a good school, if you live in a bad area with bad teachers, it is so much harder to achieve those dreams without paid tutors, extra lessons.
Yeah. And there's fantasies in all aspects of life. There's the fantasy of, you know, the American dream or being successful, but there's also sexual fantasies. There's so many different fantasies, and if you put them all together, you're not surprised that these people exist, because society is like brainwashing its people in itself.
It's breeding the idea that you can be a desirable person.
Yeah.
Like when you see, you know, hair curler adverts, it's like, if you do this, then your hair will be like beautiful and amazing and everyone will want you and want to be your friend. Like, nobody buys a hair curler specifically just because they want curly hair and that's it. They do it because they want to be more attractive, maybe just for themselves, but some people do it as like, you know, a symbol of, I put effort into my appearance, like I am put together, I am somebody who makes an effort and I have my shit together. And so maybe it's a case of, when you have a mindset that can't function in the society that we live in, the fantasy breaks.
Yeah.
So they have to find a new one. They have to find something that they can succeed in.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes that thing is murder.
Question, Emily. Why is murder everywhere in the media? Not even in the media as well, but there are so many films, there are so many series. You have BuzzFeed Unsolved. It's literally everywhere. It's almost romanticized.
Yeah. I think it definitely, like, I have also a victim of this. I'm not saying I'm above it. I have, you know, read the true crime books. I watch BuzzFeed Unsolved.
Yeah.
I've watched all the documentaries. I am definitely very fascinated by it. I think murder is everywhere because it's something, I think as human beings, we strive to understand. And I think I, for one, definitely get very uncomfortable in situations where it's like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand and I'm expected to do things, or, you know, I have to prevent something bad from happening. So I think it must be some sort of psychological reaction of, my head doesn't work like this.
Yeah.
Like, my head could never kill another person simply because I have such a high threshold of empathy. But I'm so fascinated by the fact that somebody could, and what makes this person so drastically different.
Yeah.
I think in a way we are all definitely fascinated by things that are very different to us. And I think when you have that layer of a documentary or a true crime podcast, I think if you were actually close to somebody who got murdered, it would be so much more difficult. But when you have that layer, you can remove the empathy and just feed your curiosity, which is why I think society is a perfect breeding ground for this kind of subject, because you don't have to feel, but you have to think. Like, you know, as I was saying earlier, that thing that everybody does where they're like, oh, could I have gotten away with it? Like, what would I do if this happened? You'd never do it in real life because of your feelings, but because there's that layer, that screen, you don't have to feel. You can just think the theoreticals, and it's feeding into that fantasy of, could I be smarter than the police?
Yeah.
Like, that's why I think it's everywhere. Do you have a different opinion?
I absolutely agree with you. I also think things like books, especially, there are so many, you know, detective books, crime books, thrillers, and there's just something so appealing about, in the end, eventually finding out, which I feel like, because serial killers, most of the time, we don't actually know who they are. For example, the Zodiac Killer. You know, sometimes the serial killer will admit themselves, you know. But it's that game almost of like, who could it be?
Yeah.
We sort of remove the horrific side of, you know, these people were murdered for no reason, or they were raped for no reason. And we romanticize it, I guess. It's a game to us, and we don't actually understand the implications unless we actually know someone who was murdered or who died, until we can feel that empathy.
But then, do you think that it's Here's a question. Do you think true crime does more harm than good? Do you think that it damages the victims and the people surrounding them, just knowing that their personal details are everywhere?
It depends if they gave consent for it. Because a lot of the time, if you're going to use someone else's story, you do need their consent for it to be made into a series or into a movie. And if they want it out, if they want people to know about it, then I guess there is some good that comes out of it, because sometimes publicity is bad if it gets out of control, but sometimes it can also be a good thing if people know that, this happens and we don't live in a fantasy land. Again, going back to the link of fantasy where, murder doesn't exist. It does exist, and it's good to know that it happens. But when it's almost romanticized, is that when it gets to the point where it's not useful for society anymore?
That especially happened with Ted Bundy. I know that so many people romanticized that case. And when the movie came out, actually, loads of people were saying how insensitive it was, how, you should ask the victim's family for consent, when actually they did. The victim's family, I think they helped, his girlfriend helped with, or his ex-girlfriend, helped with the script and, pieced together things that actually happened. And so I think a lot of the time there's this big sense of, we know it's insensitive, but at the same time, we don't know these people. And so what's the harm in watching the video? They're never going to know that we did it. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I think it's different because it depends how it makes that individual feel. And we will never know how it makes them feel because we've never, they've never said, I don't like people talking about my murdered daughter.
Yeah.
I think if somebody said that, then I'd be like, okay, fair enough, maybe I won't watch this.
It's also about the intention behind making the movie or the series or the podcast or whatever. Because, that phrase, sex sells.
Yeah.
It's the same applies to murder. Murder sells. It's interesting. So if you're making it for the sake of gaining publicity and you want to make money out of it, not really a good enough reason, honestly.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a message in murder. It's the message of, the message of safety, obviously. The message of empathy. I would say it also comes down to the message of, it's so weird because everyone is human. And you feel so weird when you see these documentaries about, murderers who had a life, who had people around them. Because even though they are horrific and they have done horrible things, they are still people, but they chose to take away being a person from somebody else. And I think what I also find so fascinating is people that people that aren't detectives. I'll Be Gone in the Dark, Michelle McNamara, who wrote that book, was so invested in true crime because a murder happened in her own town when she was a teenager. In the Netflix series Don't Fuck with Cats,
that was so interesting.
It
honestly.
was so interesting to see that there was this community of people that weren't being paid for it, who hunted down this killer.
Cat killer, because they saw signs of what it takes to be a psychopath. They were like, this person is going to kill someone one day.
This is the warning.
Yeah, this is the process they're going through. Somebody needs to stop him. And they saw that, and the police disregarded it, and that's how the murder happened.
I have to admit, if they'd caught him sooner, then people's lives would have been saved. But nobody wanted to listen because it was so hard. These people were not
qualified.
Yeah. I think it also comes down to the fact of when you are a person whose job it isn't to catch serial killers, you're not confined by the same restraints, because a lot of the time, respect where respect is due, the police, they couldn't investigate a lot of it because they didn't know that it happened in their area. A lot of police departments are assigned to a specific area. A lot of the time they couldn't figure out where he was, and a lot of the time it was he hasn't actually killed a person, it's just animals. And so I think that is a very flawed system, because the reason why the Golden State Killer got away for as long as he did is because nobody realised that the crimes were connected for ages. And I think it's the police system does not lend itself to a murder case. Yeah. Because it's localised. And so if you have someone who's constantly moving and who has that mindset of outplaying the police, because if you know the rules, then you can do something that will mean that the police can't catch up to you. So is it not good? I think it's a good thing that we have people in real life whose job it isn't to catch serial killers doing it, because then they're not confined by the same procedures,
Mm-hmm.
and that they can actually catch someone.
Yeah.
I think that's a great because I think a lot of the time, while the police do catch a lot of serial killers, they don't always have the necessary freedom to be able to do so.
They're constrained by the law because a lot of the times, well, not a lot of the times, but sometimes they'll know who it is, but they just have no way of proving it, and therefore they cannot make the arrest. They cannot, put them behind bars, and that's what's so frustrating about the law is, even if we're 100% that it is this person, if we can't bring in evidence to show that it is, they're going to do it again, and we can't stop it.
Here's a question, Miriam. Would you rather put a guilty person would you rather put an innocent person in jail or allow a guilty person to walk free?
That is a very difficult question, Emily. You know what? As bad as it sounds, actually, oh god, depends what the guilty person has done, honestly. If he's like a serial killer, I would probably rather put the innocent in prison, but then what does that say about me?
I think you're coming at this from a place of logic, because you attack everything with logic.
Yeah.
And so your train of thought is, if I let the serial killer walk free, more people die than one man being in jail. So you're sort of thinking 3 lives in exchange for 1 kind of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas, okay, what if it was somebody who was a thief? Like somebody who stole 12 cars and nobody got their money back.
Then I wouldn't put the innocent behind bars, because if you're rich enough to have a car,
You're rich enough to buy another one?
yeah, no, but you're not gonna like die without it. Like I get like
Save the trees.
yeah, you horrible people.
Get rid of your car. You know what? I hope he steals it.
Yeah. No, he's just like a member of like an environmental cult.
Yeah, he just like he goes around. He's like, oh, this will teach him.
He just calculates like the amount of pollution the car like emits.
Yeah.
He's like, too high, I'm gonna steal it.
Too high. Mine now. Mine.
Honestly, if stealing a car and murdering someone are very, very opposite things. I feel like, yes, stealing is bad, but also they are probably most likely not gonna have their whole life derailed because you stole their car.
Yeah. Whereas your life would be derailed if you went to prison.
Yeah.
And if it was a crime that you didn't commit.
Yeah.
So you think in terms of murder, put the innocent man away. In terms of like petty theft or something.
Yeah. Just let them walk free, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's the thing. How many inconveniences add up to a human life? Like, how much non-violent crime equates to 1 death? In my opinion, I would say the human life is worth infinite, like, inconvenience.
That's true.
Because I suppose it's the idea of, like... I don't know. I suppose it's the idea of somebody is brought temporary unhappiness, or maybe permanent unhappiness, by something that is inflicted upon them. Whereas if you die, you have nothing.
Yeah.
You have no sense of...
You've just lost everything.
Yeah.
On a closing note...
Oh, a closing note? Oh, it is.
What cereal would you be? As in, would you be a serial killer? A serial rapist? What other cereals are there? Serial...
Hugger. I'm a serial hugger.
Yeah, you're a serial... I'm a serial cat.
A serial cat
I have
stealer.
9 lives.
You just sort of like, you do crazy things. You do like Mission Impossible. Maybe that's what Mission Impossible is. He just has 9 lives. Like, surely that would have killed him. Oh, no, he's on number 6.
Yeah. Anyway,
I was gonna go with Cocoa Pops, because when you said what kind of cereal would you be, I thought you meant like actual...
You would be the plain cornflakes. The one with no flavour.
You know what? I could get behind that. Strong, sturdy, good value for money, simple, but loving, a true staple of a British household.
I mean, fair enough.
I could get behind that. I can't lie. I am Cocoa Pops and cornflakes.
I am... What am I?
Oh, I know exactly what you are. You are somebody's mum who doesn't want to give their kids unhealthy cereal. So they buy the Honey Nut Cheerios and mix them in with the regular Cheerios.
Oh, yeah. To be fair, though, the regular Cheerios are good.
Not gonna lie, I prefer the regular
Me
Cheerios.
too.
Don't come for me, but I prefer the regular ones.
Okay, peeps, that's a wrap.
That's actually a cereal.
It's a cereal wrap.
We need to go and order a wrap now because I'm hungry. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode and stay tuned because we'll be posting next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.